Support for this episode is brought to you by the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards. The deadline is approaching for the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards, honoring young changemakers who embody the value of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Up to 15 recipients from across the U.S. will receive $36,000 each for their leadership efforts to change the world. Nominate a teen today, or they can apply directly by January 8th, 2026. Learn more at dillerteenawards.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 513, ApocryFest 2025. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg.
I'm Liana Wertman.
And I'm Lexi Kohansky.
And we are over the moon. The sun as well, honestly. We're over all astrological bodies with excitement about this moment of ours. We are here to return with our 2025 edition, our 5786 edition of ApocryFest. Before we get fully into the conversation, a big Judaism Unbouncement this week. We have 3-week mini courses in the Onion Yeshiva available for registration starting now. You can head to judaismunbound.com/classes to sign up. The classes will be beginning in January, and you can take any of the following. There's Hasidism and Neo-Hasidism with Jonah Gelfand, the Torah of Kink on Jewish text through the lens of BDSM with Margot Valles, Brit Milah Unbound, exploring circumcision with Annie Prusky, and Queering Kedusha, that means holiness, through Jewish craftways with Ali Schwartz. Amazing opportunities to learn and unlearn. We hope you will head to judaismunbound.com/classes to sign up. Financial aid, as always, is available for anyone who needs it. You can just click on the financial aid form button in any of the registration pages. And now a little bit more about ApocryFest. ApocryFest is an annual initiative where, in honor of the festival of Hanukkah, this 8-day magical light and darkness holiday in the winter, we dive into books from Jewish tradition that have been sidelined, that have not been treated as super central. We're super jazzed to do it. This has been an annual initiative of ours for a number of years now. And the we here is us at Judaism Unbound, but also our friends at the Torah Studio who are here with us. And so I'm going to pass things over to them to hear A, hi, how you doing? Who are you? For our listeners less familiar. And B, what jazzes you about ApocryFest?
Hi, I'm Liana Wertman. I'm the founder and executive director of the Torah Studio. And I love stories. I love Jewish stories. I love the stories we tell to each other. I love the stories we retell to each other. And knowing the stories that people told, but that we don't count as the quote unquote official stories, doesn't make them any less part of our story. And so I'm very excited to talk to everybody and talk to you two especially about how some of the ways that we talk about ourselves have changed over time.
And I'm Lexi Kohansky, the director of online learning at the Torah Studio. And I am new to ApocryFest this year.
You're an apocryphal edition. You're a later amendment to the text that is the ApocryFest of our organizations.
That's right. God forbid you should canonize me as part of ApocryFest.
Chas v'shalom. May none of us ever be canonized.
That's, wholehearted amen to that. So I'm new on my apocryphal journey. This is the first year I've really gotten to spend significant amounts of time with any apocrypha at all. And I'm still working out what my relationship with the apocrypha is and what place they have in my life and what actions they compel me towards and what changes I'll get from them. But so far, what I've found is, as someone who is personally very deeply committed to the canonized rabbinic tradition and has a lot of openness to those texts, to the canonized texts, speaking to me and having what to say about how I should live, that seeing the bigger environment that a lot of those texts were born out of and existed alongside just makes it so much more alive for me. And I'll have more to say about that as we go on. But so far, it's bringing life.
It's a thrill to have both of you here, and I want to turn a little just on a very practical level to the what of ApocryFest. For people who are new to it, or even those who have traveled along this, I like journey, Lexi, this journey with us in the past. The what of this. So Hanukkah is 8 days long. As we release this episode, on December 12th. Hanukkah starts in a couple days. You might be listening before Hanukkah. You might be listening after Hanukkah has started. Who knows? We love upending any notion of linear time via this podcast. But we will be, over the course of Hanukkah, releasing a number of conversations. This is the first one, and it is the heftiest. This will give some of our grand thoughts on Jewish Apocrypha, why it's worth being in relationship with these books that weren't canonized and not just the ones that were. That will be some of our conversation today, give you a window into why we chose Hanukkah, of all moments in the year, to have an Apocrypha-related observance. Then we're going to have 3 shorter bonus episodes that are going to come out during Hanukkah, so starting in just a few days, which means you'll get more Judaism Unbound podcast content than normal. One behind-the-scenes why of this is that Googling of Jewish things goes through the roof during Hanukkah. There's just a lot more people looking for Jewish-related things, and so we try to have landing spots for folks doing that Jugling, as I like to call it. And one such landing spot is ApocryFest for folks who are Googling about Hanukkah, looking to find something new about it. They find their way to our resources. So there will be more content on Judaism Unbound in the next few days. There will be some emailing that goes out where you can, in written form, see a little bit about these books of Apocrypha, get a window into why they might be of interest to us. And we're also going to have a live gathering in Zoom with the Torah Studio on Sunday, December 21st. So, Liana, give us a little window into what that is, and then we'll really dive into the fun of this conversation.
Yeah, if you are listening to this during Hanukkah, we invite you to come join us live. I hope you'll come. We're going to schmooze together. Lexi, and I are going to be talking about some of our last thoughts on this issue and this topic as we're wrapping up our series. And we'll also maybe play some Jewish games and have an opportunity just to celebrate Hanukkah together, lighting the candles for the last night. So we really hope to see you there.
It's going to be magical. You should totally come. And I will note there will be more on this at the event itself. But the date, it's December 21st. It is also the first of the month of Tevet, the first of the 10th month, if you go by the Bible's calendar of the months, which I like to. And that date, I'm going to leave it kind of suspenseful, but I'm going to say that date holds a great deal of importance to multiple books of Apocrypha. So don't miss it. JudaismUnbound.com/Apocrypha, ApocryPha. So I'd love to get a little bit to our why of this. We mentioned it briefly, but why is it important in our moment today to take a period of 8 days and sit with books that are not the ones that are most centered, cherished in our tradition? I feel like a lot of people could point to us and say, dear friends, Torah Studio, Judaism Unbound, there's a lot of Jewish books that have been treated as having sort of sacred importance by rabbis. People don't know all of those. So why are you distracting them with these other bits of Jewish teaching and story? Why do we think that it's worthwhile to do this even in a world that has other Jewish books we could explore?
I think specifically I want to define the word apocrypha as texts that are not included in our biblical canon, right? Texts that we don't include in the index list on the table of contents in our Torahs. And there are lots of reasons for why things got chosen and what got left out, but simply we can't fit all books that have ever been written into our canon, and decisions have been made. But that does not mean that those books are any less evidence and history of our time as a people, of the way that we understood our history and our future. And very specifically, one of the texts that didn't make it into our canon is anything to do with the story of Hanukkah. It starts with the book of Maccabees, which is not included in our canon, though it is included in some other religions' canons. And it tells the story of a group of Jews in revolt against the Assyrian Greeks who have made it illegal to do a lot of basic Jewish rituals and rites. And it is a story that is very intense. It's very upsetting. It's about trying to balance what our laws are for ourselves and how do we enforce them while breaking them to make sure we can keep doing them, and asks us to really question what does it mean to be Jewish, to fight for Judaism, and to try to decide what kind of history and present we want to have. And that story just kind of isn't a part of our canon. And yet here we are, 2,000 years later, plus, celebrating those 8 days, celebrating the win of returning to the temple after the Assyrian Greeks have been somewhat defeated. We still celebrate that. We still celebrate the 8 days, and yet that is not a story in our canon. So this feels like a very important time to focus on necessary and critical aspects of what religion means to us today, and the fact that they don't root in maybe as easily like traditional spaces as we might be comfortable with.
I'm kind of cooking this thought about the way that Hanukkah gets defined in the Talmud. I also see this kind of secret internal rabbinic angle on why Hanukkah is the time for Apocrypha. In the Talmud, in Maseches Shabbos, the story of Hanukkah gets introduced with the phrase, "My Hanukkah, Desanu Rabbanan," etc. What is Hanukkah? As our sages taught, and then it goes on to tell this story. Just kind of as a side note, Rabbi Jeff Fox of Maharat suggests you could read that as not, what is Hanukkah? Well, here's what the rabbis said. It's, "My Hanukkah Desanu Rabbanan." What is Hanukkah according to the rabbis? So in a way, there's already possibly this understanding that Hanukkah exists outside of the approved canon. That the rabbinic story is a departure from the story that the people are telling, possibly. Anyway, the story there has to do with the fact that when the Assyrian Greeks were making fundamental Jewish practices illegal, one of the things that they did was impurified all the oil in the temple. And practically speaking, if you've got impure oil in the temple, you can't have a temple service. Then there was this miracle, the oil that they did find that was pure lasted 8 days, and this was an incredible thing. But the idea of Hanukkah being somehow about finding impure oil and doing something with it anyway, and that to me connects to Apocrypha, because when the rabbis debate elsewhere whether a text should be included in the biblical canon or not, the way they say that is, does this text impurify you by touching it? If you touch a scroll of the book of the Song of Songs on it, does it make you impure?
And to be clear, if it does make you impure, that's actually a sacred text. Yes. Intuitively, we'd think the other way around.
Thank you for that. Yeah, if Song of Songs makes you impure when you touch it, it's part of the canon. And so when we're saying that Hanukkah is about finding oil, which is compared to Torah and mystical tradition, finding oil that is impure, and we're saying the texts that make you impure are canonized texts. And then we came into the temple and we found this one little jug of oil that we would never have thought to look at that's actually pure. That's the Apocrypha. That's the Apocrypha that we light up and spend 8 days learning. Not literally, but that's symbolically what the story of Hanukkah is about, as the rabbis tell it, is we spend time with the pure things, the Apocrypha.
That's incredible. I love that angle. That's really cool. I mean, I thought you were going a different way, but your point was cooler. I will bring where I thought you were going, just to add it into the conversation, which is when the rabbis tell the story of Hanukkah in the Talmud. So the Talmud that we're talking about is the Gemara, sort of the later stages of the full compendium of what we think of as the Talmud, which starts with the Mishnah and then includes the Gemara. And so we're talking about a period of time of many hundreds of years, from like the year 200 to the year, let's say, 600. The rabbis in the Gemara are looking around, and they're kind of, you can feel this in the text, in the way you described that they start the story with, well, Hanukkah, according to the rabbis, according to us, is they're looking around and they're like, shit, there are these people, they're Jews, they seem to really be into Hanukkah. And from the rabbi's perspective, that actually appears to have been a problem. The Mishnah tried very hard to erase Hanukkah's existence. It's only mentioned in a few minuscule moments throughout the entire text. You have whispers that Hanukkah exists, but it seems to be that the rabbis who brought the Mishnah together would prefer it not be there, because they didn't want to celebrate this set of folks who led the Maccabean revolt, and as it turned out, actually kind of failed as leaders, like that they didn't endure for all that long. And there were a number of other theological and philosophical issues the rabbis had with the Maccabees. And so their strategy for a while was to try and have like nothing, to hope that this observance would go away. But the people were connecting to this festival, and they were connecting it to this Maccabean revolt. And what the rabbis decided was, okay, they're going to have this holiday. We're going to try to change the meaning, though. We're going to try to have it be about God and miracles. And that's where the oil story comes in. God made the oil last longer than it could have otherwise. And they sort of shift the goalposts of the holiday so that it's celebrating how great God is, as opposed to how great this military victory was, which has like political implications, right? Like there's a lot to that. But I think that the story of Hanukkah itself has transformed at that point in history, and then also at later moments where it's clear when you talk about what Hanukkah has been in different eras, that different groups of Jews get to decide what Hanukkah is in those eras. And so in a similar way, then this is what I thought you were going to say, Jews in different eras, we can look at our corpus of texts and decide which texts we're going to see as special to us, as sacred to us, whether or not they are in the canon or seen as apocryphal. But again, I think that where you went with, that which we can actually find as making our hands pure, we play around with that during Hanukkah because of that story with the temple, I find majestic.
In Hanukkah essentially being apocryphal, not really rooting in one particular text, getting lots of different reads across time and space, it has also collected other aspects of an apocryphal holiday, specifically that there is another text, another apocrypha text that we read during this time. There are two, and that is the book of Judith. I actually think I missed something there. That
was a Star Wars reference. Lexi got it and was laughing really visibly in our Zoom room, but Liana, you didn't catch it.
Like when if Luke didn't succeed, then Leia, his sister, would have been there.
We'll sticky note the conversation about which Star Wars texts are canon and which ones are apocryphal, because that's right. Actually related. Yeah,
that is an important crossover. I know that theoretically, not at all in any information details. But the book of Judith is also apocryphal. The book of Judith also talks about people standing up to oppressors, people who are coming to try to make it impossible to be Jewish. And it tells the story of a Jewish woman who goes down and sneaks into the camp of the people who are sieging her town. And she uses her femininity and seduces one of the most important people there, the head guy. And then speaking of head guy, she cuts his head off. And my favorite part of the whole thing is she runs back up in the middle of the night. She like runs back up to her siege city and is like, "Hey everybody, where's your big head honcho?" And they're like, "He's in his tent." And she's like, "Oh, is he?" And then pulls his head up and is like, "No, he's right here." It is a great story. I think one of the things that I'm thinking about it right now is the way that it tells that exciting, heroic story of not breaking Jewish law necessarily, but actively kind of going around to figure out how to make sure that we can survive, that the Maccabees kind of doesn't. I'm bringing in that one of the things the Maccabees does that makes a lot of the rabbis uncomfortable is they break Shabbat to fight the empire. They break Shabbat, and that is not something the rabbis are maybe necessarily comfortable with. Maybe they're a little, for some reason, after the temple has been destroyed, more comfortable with messing with temple rituals. But here, Judith is staying completely within bounds and is really expressing this joyful, life-giving, standing up to oppression that we really love. And also just shout out to the great art of her holding up his head. But I think there's also, if Lex, you want to talk a little bit more about where this book, like how this book kind of comes into the Apocrypha specifically of Hanukkah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I think a lot of it boils down to her name being Judith, which like we hear Judith and it's funny, like you look at all the books of Tanakh, of Hebrew Bible, you look at the books that are Apocrypha that are seen by some as part of the Bible, like Judith, and most of the names don't sound just like somebody who would live in our neighborhood. Judith is like, there's a lot of Judiths in like contemporary society. And so I think we hear that name and we're just like, oh, that's a name, Judith, whatever. But her name is kind of like Jewish woman. Like the word Yehudit, Judith, she is clearly a stand-in for like Jewishness, Judeanness as a whole. And it's clear that you're not supposed to just read her as like, oh, cool, like interesting woman who did something, but rather as like, oh, wow, she's kind of a rallying figure for the entire Judithian people. And similarly, the name Judah of Judah Maccabee holds a similar role in terms of how the story of the Maccabees becomes not just a story about a particular family, but rather a story about Jewishness, Judeanness more broadly. And so I think that's part of it, which you could say, oh, that's just kind of like a linguistic accident. But I'm not sure. I think there were conscious efforts by the creators of both of these stories. And so Judith, I think it was a popular story that people were interested in, and they wanted a time anchor for it. They wanted like a moment in the year where we'd have it. And it didn't have one with any of our other holidays. And Hanukkah kind of, I don't know, it had a vacancy. There's like a gap. There's no text that you go to synagogue and read for Hanukkah. It's like, we don't even think about that, right? Like on Purim, you go and you read Esther, right? Like that's a core element of what you do. On other holidays, this is not always well known, but like Sukkot, you have the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, that is associated with the holiday. Passover, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs is associated with it. Ruth on Shavuot. You have a lot of these books that are really good stories. Like a lot of the story-focused narratives, we kind of want an excuse to tell them. And so we find something within a holiday to bring it in. And I think Judith, like you said, there are parallels between it and the general story of Hanukkah of Judeans being faced with some form of oppression or scared about their continuing existence, rebellion against that oppression, or for Judith, I loved the little joke you made about cut off the head. Like responding to a power figure through violence. Like that's something that Judith and the story of Hanukkah share. And I'm grateful for it. Like I'm grateful that we found a back door into the calendar of Jewish practice for these cool stories, because turns out when you have an annual reason to read something, that story is more likely to persist than if you just have a cool book out there. There's all sorts of books. I will be honest with you. Like there's entire sections of the minor prophets of that section of the Bible that I've read a little bit. Like I've read all of the sections at least a couple times, but like not very much. And the parts that aren't featured as like a Haftorah reading for a particular thing that you do once a year, I rarely get to those because we're human beings and we're busy, right? And so you need to find a rhythmic moment to visit these texts, which again brings us back to why we have ApocryFest. Like, I don't think we would just do this. I think we might, the three of us and others, have in the back of our mind, you know, it'd be cool to have a relationship to Apocrypha. But if we don't ritualize it, then actually following through with that is hard.
One of the things that it's making me think about ApocryFest, right, is we could have picked a canon text. We don't read everything. There are minor prophets that we don't read the entirety of. So it's totally it would have made perfect sense for them to attach a text that we already have, one that it is canonized into our Hanukkah, but rather we have left it in that kind of semi-canonized space. And, you know, one of my favorite Hanukkah Apocrypha stories is like the Megillat Antiochus. It's like a much later text that was continued for many, many years to be read during Hanukkah. In Italian Jews were the ones who read that story in their community for the longest time, up until the 20th century. But I think they were also missing that, right? You don't even have to go to synagogue on Hanukkah. There's no reason to go to synagogue on Hanukkah. You could do Shabbat and then go home and then light the, right? Like there isn't. Sorry, Lexi's laughing at me. It's 7 days. So there are reasons to go to shul that happen during. We endorse
not going to synagogue in this space.
It's actually the new rule.
It's a not going to synagogue safe space.
Apocryphal rule, you don't go to synagogue on Hanukkah, period.
I just want to say on Hanukkah, there is Hallel. If you like singing with people, Hallel, that could be reason.
Hallel being, you know, praises of God that you do on particular moments in the calendar associated with happiness or victory.
You could go to an already happening daily minyan and sing Hallel. But I'm saying like there's no thing that you go to. Like you don't have to light Hanukkah candles at shul, at synagogue. You don't have to have a rabbi light the candles for it to be legitimate. This is a completely home holiday. And I think that's one of the reasons why the texts or other texts never really stuck and why it's continued to stick with apocryphal texts is because we want the story to continue to evolve. It is an oral tradition in a way that we've lost a lot of. We talk about Torah having originally been oral Torah following alongside. We talk about how they memorized Mishnah and Talmud. This is still one of the stories that is changing every single time we tell it. Not just because we're not reading it directly. You know, we all know a lot of additional stories about Abraham that we know are outside of Torah, but are really a big part of our communities. But in this case, there's no text we're basing it off of. There's no one thing. And so I think there's a lot of freedom that was given to us to not have a text attached to it, to make sure that it was our story, right? We are the text attached to it. Our lives, our understanding of what it means to fight for our right to be Jewish. And that looks very, very different and has looked different in different time periods. And yet that story has continued to be something that calls to us.
For me, what I've been thinking about during this conversation is so much of what is valued in many Jewish communities is text learning, engagement with text, fluency, textual literacy, knowing a lot of the words that have been written down. The way that Hanukkah is like, the history of it is like the people were doing this and the rabbis had to felt they had to intercede to control it. And even then, like texts and practices that the rabbis did not approve of keep squeezing themselves in there. The books of the Maccabees, Judith, Megillat Antiochus. It all to me points to the limits of what a text can be, even a sacred text that is at the center of our practice or the people of the book. And there's only so far that can go in making an actual living community in the world. And also there's only so much holiness that a written down and approved of text can contain and can bring to us. And if we want to be full human beings inside of our tradition, we just need to remember that the tradition is more than the books on the shelf and more than the books that are encouraged for us to have on our shelves.
That's such a good point. And we're arcing towards the close of this episode, but I wanna give a shout to some like genres within Apocrypha, because I think it's important to notice the different kinds of work that some of these books are doing. And it will also help us sort of give an overview of two books that we'll be diving into in future conversations. But one realm of Apocrypha books is stories, experiences, like narratives that I'm not going to say they're outside of the Bible's stories, but they're kind of their own literature. Like the book of Judith, like you can find ways in which it is sort of talking to the Bible. It mentions, for example, that Judith is a descendant of this person, of this person, of this person. It connects her back to the tribe of Shimon, the tribe of Simeon, who is, of course, mentioned in the book of Genesis. And so like we can find interesting things there. But mostly it's its own story. And similarly, Maccabees, like it's a set of things that happened to some degree historically. Now, the book of First Maccabees and the later books of Maccabees are not history textbooks. There are things in them that are inaccurate, but they contain elements of history in revision form. That's a couple genres. But another genre, which we've featured in past ApocryFest and which we'll really be diving into this time, is people who literally look at texts that we are used to seeing as part of the Bible, like, say, Genesis. And they say, well, that's like solid, like a decent first crack. I'm going to change it, though. I'm going to add a bunch of details that were not there. And I'm not going to do that from a place of calling it like midrash, which other people did later on. I'm not going to do it and say that my genre is sort of a commentary on the previous text. I'm going to do this and say it's kind of on equal terms with the original text. And so we're going to be looking at two books that do that this time around. One with the book of Genesis. So we're looking at Genesis Apocryphon, which is a text that was found. It was one of the very first texts that was found when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at Qumran. And it's very fragmented. We don't even have the fullness of the story. It's kind of like scattered sets of text here and there with a few words here and then a bunch of sentences there, and you have to weave it all together and take your best guess at what's happening. But it does some very interesting things with Genesis. And it clearly was taking a tack of, I'd like to know more about the generations just before Noah. What's the deal with them pre-flood? What's happening? Might we be able to learn a little bit more about the context that led to this Noah figure and this flood? And we get some words about that. We even get some words about later generations like Abraham. And then we have another text we're going to look at that's called 4 Ezra, the number 4 Ezra. I won't go into the numbering now. We'll talk about that a little bit when we have the conversation. But effectively, this is a text that takes the character Ezra, the person Ezra, who has a book named after him in the Bible, and adds an entire sort of mystical set of experiences to his life where he's interacting with angels and having these psychedelic experiences and learning truths about the world. And it adds so much to who we might understand Ezra, the person, to be. And so that's a genre where folks decided to have the chutzpah of saying, it's my right to add between the lines, to change elements of what happened in Bible and make that part of the textual fabric of what it means to be Judean or Jewish, which is, in my view, really cool and kind of a model for what I hope Judaism Unbounders and Torah Studio Nicks will be doing in their lives.
I also want to note that in past years, we've done a variety of different apocryphal texts from many different time periods. And that this year we're focused on 2 texts that are still pretty early. There are lots of apocrypha that pop up way later in the rabbinic time period that are so obviously not part of older types of texts. But these are 2 books that are still pretty closely linked with the late Second Temple, early rabbinic period when we're talking about canonizing and thinking about canonizing at all. And so they're at least somewhat in the conversation. And I think that's really, as we focus this year on what does it mean to have made decisions about a Jewish canon, and what does it say about the world around us when we make those kinds of decisions on, right? Because Lex, what I'm thinking about is you saying that they had the chutzpah to compare. It's also feasible to imagine that they just were alternates and someone chose them along the way, that people took attempts of writing different things down. And here we have both one that a lot of people, Genesis Apocryphon comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we know people wrote them down and took them seriously. These are books that we know were in conversation with Bible, with the Torah, because we found them in the same kinds of scrolls. And so we have to really think about the multivocality of a Jewish present. And of course, the way that that gets compressed over time. And I think that this is a particularly ripe set of text to do that with.
I just want to throw out there as a first-time ApocryFester,
ApocryFestivus? I don't know.
ApocryFestivist. I just want to throw out there as a first-time ApocryFestivist that these books are very hard to read. I mean, it's even like in the same way that a lot of the books of the canonized Bible, especially the prophets, are quite difficult. I mean, 4 Ezra is like as hard as the book of Job in a lot of ways. Genesis Apocryphon is not only at least as hard to understand as Genesis itself, but also we don't have the whole thing, so it's in fragments. So my experience sitting down with these things is almost like, I don't know where to start with this. And because they aren't canonized, we don't have thousands of years of Jews talking about them preserved the same way that we do for Genesis itself or for the book of Job. I can't Google like a cool Devar Torah on Genesis Apocryphon, but that's one of the reasons I'm really excited that we have ApocryFest and we get to start building up some ways into these texts, which are, as the name apocryphal may suggest, hard to access.
Absolutely. What a good closing note. A rallying cry for all of our people. Like, let's save this episode and hopefully in 10 years, when we Google 4 Ezra and when we Google Genesis Apocryphon, we'll find Divrei Torah that folks in this ecosystem of organizations have created. I think that's realistic. I think it's possible. And I'm glad you mentioned sort of the meaning of apocryphal. Like we haven't talked about it all that much, but like the actual etymology of the word apocryphal relates to the idea of secret, like something that is kept secret. Because really, at the end of the day, the set of texts we're talking about, they're not really one genre. They only feel like one genre because they are being compared to Bible and being called not that. But this idea that there's kind of a secret set of teachings and stories preserved, it makes Apocrypha kind of alluring. Like there's a reason why since the internet has grown a great deal, like a lot of folks who are Jewish have felt called towards Apocrypha in different ways, myself very much included. A lot of Christians, like if you go into these deep Google dives, like you'll find all sorts of wild stuff with Apocrypha, because there's people who are like, wow, there are these secret texts that have been on the sidelines, and there's something to find there. So my hope is that all of you out there listening can struggle your way through. Lexi's right. These are tough texts to actually just get through from beginning to end sometimes, and find a couple nuggets. Maybe the fragment is the gift. Maybe the fact that there's a big Mad Lib, there's like a big gap in sections of Genesis Apocryphon where it's not clear what happened, is an invitation for us to actually come in and be like, hey, everyone, I'm the text. I found what's happening in these intervening verses. Here's the Mad Lib for our time that is going to be a useful Jewish resource for our moment. So I hope you can struggle your way through and find one or two of those nuggets. Continue with us in the bonus episodes that are coming up. We're going to be diving into 4 Ezra and Genesis Apocryphon, and we're also going to have a final conversation that will be exploring the purposes and the function of Apocrypha today, beyond any particular example of apocryphal text. So we hope that you'll continue with us. JudaismUnbound.com/Apocrypha if you want to sign up for our event coming up. JudaismUnbound.com/classes if you want to sign up for our amazing 3-week mini courses starting in January. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.